welcome back to CB Conversations. My name is Sophie Burley, and I have the pleasure today of being joined by the VP and Director of Sales of Turley Wine Cellars, Christina Turley. Welcome to CB Conversations. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, very happy to be here.
Excellent. Maybe a little bit jet lagged. We've dragged you to London away from home.
It's a bit far, yes.
Yeah. But the reward is we've got some of your wonderful wines here today as well. We picked out the Zinfandel Old Vines of 2020 vintage. So thought it fitting to have a glass while you're here. So
Cheers.
Cheers. And thank you for coming.
It's my pleasure.
Always beautiful wines. And being in Zinfandel, I think, is characteristic of Turley. Zinfandel, maybe a little bit of a tricky grape to work with. So tell me about your relationship with that varietal.
Absolutely. Obviously, we have a deep love for Zinfandel at Turley. And truly, it's from my father learning about wines and falling in love with Zinfandel and particularly old vine vineyards of Zinfandel. It is indeed a tricky grape to grow. I think anyone who tells you that Pinot Noir is the heartbreak grape has never tried to make a Zinfandel before. It's very thin-skinned, and the clusters are quite tightly bunched together. So mildew can be an issue, sunburn, raisination, a whole matter of pests and things like that as well. Also, it ripens very quickly and quite early. That can be a good thing in many instances. Fire season is now a season in California, for example, but many of the Zinfandel vineyards we work with across the state ripen well before that season starts. But it can also mean you have several vineyards getting ripe at the same time and needing to be picked, needing to find space, tank space, barrel space in the winery for all of these things getting ripe at the same time can always be a challenge. It is hard work and happens very quickly at times. But I think there's quite a bit of reward to it as well. Zinfandel is a very expressive grape, particularly the vines that are planted head pruned. And we have several vineyards that are planted still on their original roots, which is incredibly unique in the world, not just in the United States, in California. And I also think one thing that I look to Zinfandel for is history and identity. So there are many grapes in the world, grown all over the world, but they will forever be compared to their European counterparts, right? Pinot Noir will forever be compared to the benchmark of Burgundy, Cabernet de Bordeaux, et cetera. And one of the beautiful things about Zinfandel is the criterion is the California version. We are not trying to mimic another region that is thousands of miles away, that has centuries of experience to figure out exactly what hillsides produce the best Pinot Noirs, Chardonnays, et cetera. So we are still, I would say, since we are so young, but we have this freedom to both define and create what is California winemaking and what is California wine growing. And through the lens of Zinfandel, which is a grape that can grow everywhere in California. That is quite unique. We have an enormous number of soil types, elevations, and microclimates in California. We have quite a bit of seismic activity in California as well. So there are all different soil types mixed one on top of the other. You have both volcanic soils and uplifted seabed just in Napa Valley, for example. So Zinfandel is one of the only grapes that can grow in these diverse conditions, and it is very expressive of those places. So we do believe that Zinfandel is the best grape to show California's varied terroirs, and it's so expressive of each of those places and from such a diversity of backgrounds that it's really a wonderful thing. And then lastly, it is part of our history for California wines and wines in the entirety of America. There were other grapes that have been planted over the years in California, but Zinfandel first came to the States in the mid-1800s and came to California in the gold rush, so mid-1800s, 1849, 1850. By 1860, it was already the most widely planted grape in California. And by then, it was already recognized as making the very finest wines, right? We didn't have varietal label. We wouldn't start calling things by the grape variety for another 100 years. And at first, we used the only language that we had, which was the language of European wines. So in these old texts, you'll see Zinfandel wines described as the very finest claret. And occasionally there were labels on wines calling them Burgundy or Hardy Burgundy. And often Zinfandel was the base of both of these styles of wine. And this was the wine that put California on the map, truly in the entire country, as a real force to be reckoned with when it came to fine wines and the proliferation and the various number of styles you could make Zinfandel. And that is an important part of our history and our cultural history as Californians. And again, something that makes us unique in the world.
Uniqueness, definitely, not only in the grapes that you're using, but the fact that this is a family winery as well. I mean, we were speaking about your father, Larry, earlier as quite the character. Yes. And if I'm not mistaken, the 4 stars on the top of each bottle, do they represent you and your sisters? Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
So you're the oldest of 4, I believe. How is it having your sort of family legacy distilled into the Turley label? I mean, there's a lot of precision, but there's a lot of history, just as there is in the family. Your father going from the emergency room in a past life to winemaking is
Yes.
quite the change.
Indeed.
How have you found the involvement of family legacy in the brand itself?
Well, I think Turley is expressive of my father, Larry Turley, more than any one person. And that's primarily because he loves these wines. That's why he wanted to make them. There's no marketing, no financial impetus behind it other than just a pure love of the wines and the old vine vineyards that they come from. And I think these wines are very expressive, like Larry himself. You know, he's a very tall man. He has a big personality. He's quite charming, immediately, but also the more you get to know him, the more impressive he is with his various backgrounds. So he was an emergency room physician for 20 years, which is about 15 years longer than you should be working in emergency medicine. Right. But he has such a clear head, such a calm demeanor. And I think that led to his success for so many years in such a difficult position. But we do like to joke at the winery that it's all of his time in emergency medicine that led him to love vineyards so much, because after 20 years in urgent care, he thinks he can resuscitate anything. And so that's where his love for these old vine vineyards, I think, truly comes from, is not just the fact that they're old, but seeing the health in these ancient vines and seeing the potential for that to be restored. And that's something that's very important to him.
That's, a beautiful story, having that ability to resuscitate and bring these old vines back to life. I think It's a wonderful symbol. You're right to bring up your father being a bit of a character. I remember a while ago, I was lucky enough to go to a brilliant tasting of yours at Noble Rot in London, which is a wonderful location. And you mentioned a story about your father leaving a certain signature everywhere he goes. Do you remember?
I do remember. How could I possibly forget? I think my whole family remembers this, some more fondly than others. So yes, my father's long been a fan, I think, of things being perfectly imperfect, I would say. He is a fan of enjoying wine, not necessarily just it being such a precious, intellectual experience, but being a real visceral and involving all the senses, including sight. This sort of started with, he was doing a dinner somewhere, I think in Chicago, and someone spilled wine on their very, very white shirt. And instead of feeling distressed about it, asked my father to sign it. And my father was so charmed by this idea of celebrating a spill instead of being very stressed that it was something that had gone wrong, that he has embraced that very much. So our business cards and some of our letterhead has little, drops and dribs of wine on it. He has a desk that he has covered in wine stains on purpose, so that you can't tell, you can never say that it's a mess or it's made a mess, because it was intentionally put there in the first place. And this particular story is the 40th anniversary of my stepmother's distribution company, where she had wineries from all over the world that she's represented for many, many years, coming to Napa Valley to our home to celebrate. And the night before, we'd had these long redwood tables that they'd spent many years drying out, that they'd cut slabs of, and that was the top of the table, and it was still quite raw wood. And my father felt, I think, that it was just too simple looking. Despite the fact that it was not his party, he decided to get up on a ladder the night before the party and spill bits of petite sirah down the center of the table, just so that it looked the same as all of the very signature sort of Turley wooden tops. So like I said, it's a memory for some people that is more fond than others, but I look at it very fondly, as my father likes to leave his mark, and it's a very signature one where it's a bit of a mess, but in a beautiful way.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I think I might try and convince everyone in our office to let me, drip some Turley on the table. So I think that'll be a great signature. And not only your father's leaving his signature on Turley, but you are as well. Am I right in thinking you have written every single tasting notes for all of the 50 wines that you have?
That's true, yes.
Which is an incredible feat in itself, not only being the VP and head of sales, but doing that is like a whole other job.
Thank you.
I mean, we have some wine in front of us here to maybe get you in the mood. But I was wondering, is there a process or a headspace you get into when you're writing the tasting notes?
Absolutely, yes. So every time we sit down to taste through the wines, we divvy them up by release. We have 4 releases now, so 1 per season. And the process is the same every time. So Tegan Pasalacqua, who's been our winemaker now for 22 years at Turley, who I consider like a brother at this point, definitely part of the family. He and I will sit down and taste through the wines, and he'll usually talk a little bit about the vintage overall, what it was like, and how he feels the wines are characteristic of that vintage. But then we go wine by wine. And generally, we're quiet at first, just experiencing it, but we'll be more expressive. And certainly as the tasting goes on, things get more and more boisterous and rowdy and shared, more thoughts are shared. But I usually just let him speak more than I say anything. I just listen to him and I write down pretty much everything that he says. And then I add my own thoughts, but somewhat quietly, unless I have a question specifically about a wine that I want him to answer. I don't talk so much during this process because it is my voice that ends up writing this note. And so my voice is certainly in the note itself in terms of the composition and putting together the thoughts, especially in a way that I hope will be as expressive as possible of the wine itself, of the final product. And I liked what you said earlier about, wondering about the language of wine, I think, and the language of art as well, that you can be extremely specific and descriptive, and that will certainly help in your experience of the wine, but you do not need to speak that language in order to be able to enjoy the wine itself. I think I see too many people get caught up and say, I don't know how to describe what I like, or I don't know what tannins are, I don't know what it means when you say it has a dry finish, that kind of a thing. I don't think that really matters that much. What matters is, do you like it? Is your experience a pleasurable one? That first and foremost is the most important thing. Of course, developing your ability to speak that language will only help you be able to communicate with a wider group of people. For example, in a restaurant, you will be able to better describe what you're looking for in a wine. But certainly you don't have to be a professor of English or art history or wine in order to enjoy a well-made bottle of wine.
And I'm just trying to experience now in the moment. Mm-hmm. I mean, these wines are so expressive anyway. And are there any notes that jump out to you that are signature to the 2020 vintage?
Certainly signature to Zinfandel and to this vintage, I think, brambly fruits, we say. So wild blackberries, black raspberries, all manner of sort of wild berry fruits you can get in that. And I think that's a signature. The second one is spices, all manner of spices. Often you'll hear different peppercorns, black peppercorns, pink, white pepper, things like that. And then baking spices, all manner of spices from all over the world as well. I think it's really interesting. Often the wines that we make from Lodi in particular will have like a black tea characteristic that's signature, also in the tannin as well. So that kind of tea tannin that is perhaps more gentle, not as drying, but still a significant structure to it, I will find in these wines, and I find that a very pleasurable experience.
Yeah, and you mentioned your head winemaker, Tegan, and I know that they've played an incredible part of what Turley is today.
Absolutely.
But also in the kind of education of what historic vines are,
Yes.
and about viticulture. And I know you also have one of the oldest fully certified organic vineyards in Napa Valley, I believe. Is that all right?
I'm not sure. I haven't actually looked into whether it's the oldest organic vineyard. We have been, our home property on our estate is one of the longest certified organic properties in Napa Valley. We've been farming organically since the late 1970s, early 1980s, really before Turley even existed. My father started a winery called Frog's Leap with his partner, John Williams, and they made a number of wines from the property and have been farming organically ever since then. So it's certainly a big part of what we do. All of our estate-owned vineyards are certified organic. My father grew up on what he says was an organic tobacco farm, and that's why it's so important to him. I don't truly understand why one would bother farming tobacco organically, but I guess that's why things like Diet Coke exist. But anyways, so organic farming has always been a really important thing to him. And he's always lived more on the viticultural side of things than the winemaking side of things. I think, as you can imagine, emergency medicine is extremely stressful. For a long time, I didn't understand that people had fathers who were home for breakfast and dinner. I thought you saw your dad once every 3 days.
Wow. Yeah.
And I think you can imagine, being gone for 3 days at a time and then needing to really be grounded in your off time. And my father found no better way of doing that than driving the tractor and spending time in the vineyards itself. And I think particularly the old vine vineyards, the history that they represent, what they had seen when these plants went in the ground. We work with more old vine vineyards at Turley than any other winery in the world. Wow. And to know that we have several vineyards that are planted pre-Prohibition in the United States, that were planted before phylloxera, that were planted before these world wars, that were planted before there was electricity, before there were cars, before the Industrial Revolution even, is such an incredible piece to think about, that we are enjoying fruit from a vine that was planted, before women had the right to vote.
Wow.
is really an impressive thing to imagine. Absolutely. What the world looked like. I don't know how often you watch old Western movies, but we do it every once in a while in my house. And I watched one not too long ago that was set in 1890. And I thought about how incredible it was, what California looked like in particular. It was truly the wild, wild west. I mean, some people had horses, but these were pioneers living off the landscape, very few log cabins, few and far between. And to think that that was set 5 years after several of our vineyards were planted is just an absolutely humbling thought in the best way.
Amazing. I mean, Turley has, like you said, so much scope historically back in time, but also now you have a lot of scope globally as well. I mean, I know that domestic demand for Turley is very high. I mean, we had someone else on the podcast who is quite big in the restaurant and tech world and a bit of an enophile themselves. And on the podcast, they talked about Turley wines and how whenever they're given the chance, they lock down as much Turley as they can kind of get their hands on.
Wonderful.
Based in America. But, we're experiencing the demand in the UK. How has translating the Turley brand and the story been when you are trying to open Napa wines up to the global stage?
So telling the story of both Zinfandel and Turley is one of the joys of my life, no question. I've spent the last 15 years, I've worked for the winery crafting that story, finding what resonates with people in certain places and trying to tell it at every chance I possibly get. So thank you for another opportunity. So what became important to me personally, where I think my chance to put a sort of mark on the winery has been bringing it to a larger global audience. I used to work as a sommelier in New York City, and our restaurant got 2 stars the year that we opened. And I took great pride in that and wanted to mimic the wine lists that I saw at the other Michelin-starred restaurants around the world, and started collecting wine lists and reading through them to make sure that we were sort of up to par in the same way. And it was in this process that I realized that not one single restaurant whose list I looked at had any Zinfandel on it whatsoever. And these were always global lists that represented the best wines from every grape variety in the world, but missing what to me is a very significant category. Again, if you're looking for the best wines from each country that is a well-known winemaking country and you lack Zinfandel, which is the signature grape, right? Nothing is more American than coming from somewhere else. It's originally from the coast of Croatia. And we just changed the name to something we can pronounce more easily as Americans. And then you make your fame and fortune in California. A very American story, I think, in the best possible way. So I decided that I would come back to work for the winery and that my mission in particular would be to bring these wines to as many countries as I possibly could and to bring them to the tables of these very fine restaurants. And I'm very proud to say that we are still in the process of doing this, but we have opened quite a few new countries for Turley. And my two white whales were both Japan, because of the culinary history and pride and knowledge they have there, and France, because that is the single most difficult place to sell wine in the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not French wine.
Exactly.
I
think the appreciation that I saw in France for this wine is because it's not something they already have been doing for centuries. They don't have, any bias towards it for that reason. And because of that, they were able to just enjoy it as something completely different, that it's expressive of a completely different place. And that has brought a lot of joy, certainly. The main things about showing Zinfandel to new people, especially new countries, a lot of education is involved, right? For many of the other grape varieties, there is already a baseline of knowledge. And so for many other wineries, they don't need to define what they're doing or define what the wine is or should be or give you much context even. They just need to give you context on the winery themselves. A very large part of my presentations in front of trade people, in front of consumers, is education on Zinfandel, period. Why it's a significant grape, the history, what it represents for the American wine industry, but also what it offers to the world and why it's so unique, particularly the old vine vineyards of that and why there's so many of old vine vineyards that are Zinfandel. So education is a large part of what we do at Turley. And that stems also from my father's influence. Education has always been extremely important to him. And we all got the chance to go to college. That was a huge part of our upbringing, that was the goal. And he also now very generously helps pay for college for any of the children of our employees.
Wow.
So it's a scholarship program, essentially, that we do privately at Turley. And he's helped quite a number of children in their way to getting degrees, to be the first ones in their families to go to college. It is such a point of pride for him. And I, too, am just so incredible and grateful that we can do that.
That's incredible and not something that I think a lot of people are doing. So it's great to share that message that that's what Turley stands for and stands behind. You were mentioning getting into the French market and other, global markets. And it seems wrong to ask when you have 50 incredible wines in front of you, but are there any other wineries, regions, countries that you will always find in your personal cellar?
Yes.
Other
absolutely.
than Turley.
Yes. So I have sort of two stories for you, but in particular, it's a very geeky one, but I really love the wines of the Jura. And the white wines in particular, I just find so compelling. I mean, talk about a wine of a place that can only be made there because these yeast strains only exist there. As much as I would love to try to make Jura wines, aged under the voile in California, it's simply never going to happen in the same way with the same depth and richness that you find in the Arbois. But I do love the red wines as well, particularly Trousseau. And that, I think, is a very funny. So the ancient word for trousseau, it was something that a woman entered into a marriage with, right? It would be, I think, in general, like a chest of linens, tablecloths, sheets, napkins, things like that. That was your trousseau that you brought into the marriage. And so my joke is because my husband sells all European wines in California, And in particular, he has a very large portfolio of wines from the Jura. And this has been part of our courtship and our relationship since the very first night that we met. And he bought 3 different bottles of Jura for me to try and promised to take me there. And I sort of rolled my eyes like, sure, buddy. And then 3 months later, lo and behold, we were there. And it's still to this day one of the most precious trips I've ever taken, because again, to see a place that you've dreamt of for so long that is so specific, that it's so unlike anywhere else, and that it has its own character as expressed through these wines. But my silly joke is I married my husband for his trousseau.
That's amazing. I mean, a good reason as any. Right.
Exactly. I've got California covered. I just need his help there. Plus those wines age so well. And really, it's difficult to have one of those Jura wines be over the hill. And I understand they're not for everyone, but I appreciate so much that they're also already oxidized. And so it's something that you can enjoy over the course of several nights if you don't feel like, for whatever reason, drinking an entire bottle yourself in one evening.
Or whether you do.
Yes. I'm not familiar with that phenomenon, but I've been told that it happens.
Yes. Yeah. I've heard somewhere on the grapevine it happens. Turley has been described, I think, by many people as where terroir meets attitude. And I think what I'm sensing is that attitude stems beyond the bottle. It's the people, it's the culture, it's the art, it's the incredible power suit that is right in front of me, and the sense of fashion that you have, which I know is a little bit of a passion of yours. Absolutely. So how do you feel that assumption of, where terroir meets attitude, how do you see that coming to life with Turley?
That's a great question. So I think a lot of the personalities that work at Turley are big personalities. And that is both a blessing and a curse. So you get a lot of ideas thrown around. There can be clashes as well. I see the beauty is in the compromise between the two, right? And even if you are having a disagreement about something because one person feels very strongly in one direction and that might be the opposite that the other person feels, the beauty is in the tension between the two, right? If we were all just yes men and women kowtowing to every whim of my father's, the wines would not be what they are today. They would not be as expressive. There wouldn't be as much variety per se. But he still puts his stamp and his signature and his style of what he wants. And Tegan has very proudly said that even though we've perhaps become better farmers over the years in our vineyards, now doing this for 30 years, we really know what to look for in each vineyard. That we have not changed the style to something that my father doesn't like. So even though we've refined this style, I think, immensely and made even more increasingly elegant wines, my father still enjoys them from the very moment that they come off the bottling line. And he's still so proud and so thrilled to open a glass of his own wine that if you were to send him into your cellar, no matter what else is in there, he's pulling a bottle of his own wine.
Excellent. Why wouldn't he? I mean, that's incredible. And I guess to finish off, usually what we do on CB Conversations is we do a few fun quick fire questions.
All right.
Are you ready?
Let's hear them.
So what is one wine myth you wish you could debunk forever?
It's definitely the language one, that you have to speak wine-ese to be able to enjoy a bottle of wine. Just because you don't understand what tannins are or the way that acidity presents itself in a bottle of wine does not mean that you can't enjoy it. It is meant to be a pleasurable experience first and foremost. And the right wine for you is a one that you like. So the better you are able to communicate that, sure, you may be able to find more wines that you like, but there is no reason that you need to be intimidated by the language around wine. It is truly a very personal experience.
A blind tasting or a pairing menu?
Pairing menu. Every time. Some of the most interesting experiences I've had with wine were when somebody opened my eyes to something. In fact, the beginning of my sommelier career truly happened because someone poured me a Riesling with a pork chop and I thought they'd gone insane. I truly looked at the guy and was like, do you know what you're doing? Is this, who let you in here? Yeah. I don't think you are supposed to be. Yeah, are you on the street? Yeah. Like how did you end up doing this? And it was the most revelatory experience, the way that those flavors and textures interacted with one another that I will never forget it. That was my very good friend of mine, Corey Lane, who was the general manager at Momofuku Sambar. And it was the first time I'd gone in. I brought my father. My father also thought they had gone insane. The music was really loud. It was a very casual place, but I had such a revelatory experience. I wrote them a thank you note and ended up getting a job there a couple weeks later.
Wow. I mean, the incredible stories just keep coming. It's amazing. What is one part of the winemaking process that feels most like therapy to you?
Drinking.
Excellent. You're hosting your dream dinner party. Who would you want to plan the wine list?
Tegan Pasalacqua, our winemaker, no question. Not only is he deeply knowledgeable, it's so personal for him. And he will make these choices based on you personally, the history that he knows about you, what he knows you like, in addition to the foods, but it will be the most, I think, heart going into deciding which wines are poured, and it will tell a story, no question.
Amazing. What's, if you can think of any, the most unusual place you've opened a bottle of Turley?
Probably in the backseat of a car.
Yeah. A good place as any.
Sure.
Turley on its own or with dinner?
On its own.
Which word do you tend to use most when you're writing tasting notes for Turley wines?
I've said expressive, I don't know how many times in this interview already, but I would say the other word that I definitely overuse is deep, depth, any variation of that word.
What's one thing non-wine related that inspires you creatively?
Art.
Okay, desert island bottle. What bottle are you taking with you?
I think if it's a Turley wine, I'm taking the 1996 Hain Vineyard Petit Syrah. I opened one of these relatively recently, and it still had plenty of time to go. Petit Syrah is one of the wines that has the highest antioxidants of almost any other red wine, so it will live forever. I've never had one be over the hill, but truly aged Petit Syrah is the single most rewarding red wine experience I've ever had in my life. And so that's what I would want as a comfort and a reward for whatever I'm enduring on this desert island, for sure.
And what's one word to describe the current 2025 Turley wines?
Well, they're not wines yet. They're still very much in their nascent form. But I think we've had a really good, cool year, and we've gotten rain again in 2025, which is always a blessing in California. I look forward to seeing what they produce.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Christina, for coming and joining us today and sharing a glass of wine, sharing all of your wonderful stories. I mean, you are a kind of wine rock star, I think, and your presence.
Self-proclaimed.
Yeah, I love it. And the presence you bring and the stories you tell about Turley is truly impressive. Thank you for sharing all of your stories today. We hope you can come back another time to CV Conversations, and that the rest of your London journey is going as smoothly as it has gone so far. So cheers to you.
Thank you.
And to Turley Wine Cellars.
Thank you. The pleasure of my life, truly, to share these wines and the stories that go along with them with as many people as possible. So thank you again for the opportunity.